Maya's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the tray of wine glasses as the shouting from the dining room grew louder. Sharp Korean words she still didn't fully understand, slicing through the walls like knives. She pressed her back against the kitchen door, heart hammering, and listened. "You will marry Jung Hana. That is final." Chairman Beck's voice was cold iron. "I don't love her." Tae-hyun's voice cracked through the wood, raw in a way Maya had never heard from him before. "You can't just decide who I marry, like I'm one of your shipping contracts." Maya closed her eyes. She had no business caring how this ended. She was the maid. She cleaned his sheets, ironed his shirts, left tea outside his study door when he worked past midnight. She was not supposed to feel her stomach drop every time she heard his voice rise in pain. But she did. God help her, she did. 3 years earlier, Maya had stood in the Incheon airport arrivals hall, clutching a single suitcase and a folded piece of paper with an address written in a stranger's handwriting, her chest tight with a grief she hadn't yet learned to carry. Her father's construction business back in Enugu had collapsed overnight. A partner had vanished with the company's funds, banks had called in loans, and within 6 months, the family that once hosted Sunday lunches for half the street was selling furniture to keep the lights on. Maya had been 3 semesters from her accounting degree at the University of Nigeria when her mother sat her down at the kitchen table and told her, voice breaking, that there was no more money for school. She hadn't cried in front of her mother. She'd gone to her room, packed a suitcase, and answered an advertisement for domestic staff in Seoul that a cousin had forwarded, because the pay, converted to naira, could keep her younger brother Chidi in secondary school and put food on her mother's table. She told herself it would be temporary. 2 years, maybe 3, enough to steady the family, enough to save something, and then she would go home and finish what she started. That was 3 years ago. She was 25 now, and Seoul no longer felt temporary. It felt like a life she'd fallen into and couldn't climb back out of. The Baek residence sat behind iron gates in Songbuk-dong, a compound of glass and pale stone that looked, Maya thought the first time she saw it, like something built to remind visitors of exactly how small they were. She'd started as junior household staff, laundry, floors, the endless polishing of surfaces no one ever seemed to touch. Within a year, she'd been promoted to run the kitchen under the head housekeeper, trusted with the family's meals, their schedules, the quiet details of their lives that only the help ever truly saw. She knew, for instance, that Chairman Beck took his coffee black before 6 a.m. meetings and sweetened after. She knew Madame Tae-hyun inspected the flowers in the foyer every morning and would have them replaced if a single petal browned. And she knew, from the day he came home from 4 years running the company's Singapore office, that the heir, Tae-hyun, hummed old trot songs under his breath when he thought no one was listening, and that he took his tea the way she did, no sugar, just heat, like he needed something to hold on to rather than something to taste. She hadn't meant to notice that. She hadn't meant to notice any of it. The first real conversation happened on a Tuesday in March, past midnight, when Maya came down to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea because sleep wouldn't come, and she didn't want to lie in the dark thinking about the collection call her mother had mentioned on the phone that evening. An old family debt resurfacing, the kind of thing Maya had thought she'd buried by working herself to the bone for 3 years. Tae-hyun was already there, sitting at the small staff table in the dark, with a bottle of soju he hadn't opened, still in his work suit, tie loosened, staring at nothing. "You should be asleep," Maya said, before she remembered herself, before she remembered that maids did not scold the heirs of conglomerates. He looked up, surprised, and then, unexpectedly, he laughed, short and tired. "So should you." "I couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." He gestured at the seat across from him, an invitation that made her chest tighten with the wrongness of it, the impossibility of it. "Sit, please. I'd rather not drink alone and think about my father's plans for my future." She should have said no. She should have made her tea and gone back upstairs to the staff quarters and let the chairman's son drink alone with his soju and his silence. Instead, she sat, and for an hour they talked about nothing that mattered and everything that did. Her brother back home who wanted to be an engineer, his childhood spent being shuttled between tutors and etiquette lessons instead of playing with other children, the way Seoul looked different at 1 a.m. than it did during the day, softer somehow, less demanding. "You're the only person in this house who's asked me a single question about myself since I got back," he said quietly, turning the unopened soju bottle in slow circles on the table. "Everyone else wants something from me. My father wants an heir who follows orders. My mother wants a wedding that saves the Jung merger. Even my old friends just want to know what it's like to be rich again." "I don't want anything from you," Maya said, and meant it, and that was the moment. She would think back on it later, again and again. That was the exact moment something shifted between them that neither of them could undo. After that night, he found reasons. He'd linger in the kitchen in the mornings under the excuse of coffee, though the household staff normally brought it to his study. He started walking through the garden at the hour she watered the hydrangeas. Small kindnesses accumulated between them like sediment. He covered for her once when she was late returning from the market because she'd stopped to help an elderly Korean woman who'd dropped her groceries. She left extra ginger tea outside his door on the mornings after board meetings she knew went badly, because she'd learned to read the tightness in his shoulders when he walked through the door. Neither of them said the word. Neither of them needed to. It was Maya who tried to end it first, 3 weeks in, standing in the garden at dusk, with her arms crossed against a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "This can't happen," she said, before he could speak, because she'd rehearsed it all afternoon, and she was afraid if she let him talk first, she'd lose her nerve. "You know this can't happen, Tae-hyun. I work for your family. I'm the maid. You're—" She gestured helplessly at the mansion behind him, the gates, the whole impossible architecture of his life. "You're going to marry Jung-hana. Everyone knows it. Your mother has probably already picked the wedding hall." "I don't want to marry Jung-hana." His voice was low, steady, none of the uncertainty she'd expected. "I don't want any of this, if I'm honest. The company, the merger, the whole life that was decided for me before I was old enough to have an opinion about it." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "The only thing I've wanted in a long time, Maya, is you." "You don't know what you're saying." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her. "I know exactly what I'm saying." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, some traitor part of her that had been starving for 3 years, finally being fed. "I know it's complicated. I know my mother would never accept it. I know the whole world would tell us this is impossible. But I've never felt this way about anyone, and I'm not going to pretend I haven't, just because it's inconvenient." She should have pulled her hand away. Instead, she stood there in the fading light, his fingers warm around hers, and felt something in her chest crack open after 3 years of holding it shut. They kept it hidden after that. Had to. Both of them understood the stakes without discussing them aloud. Stolen minutes in the garden after the staff had gone to bed. A single dance in the empty ballroom the week the household was preparing for a gala. Him teaching her the steps his etiquette tutors had drilled into him as a child. Both of them laughing quietly so no one would hear. A day off she took to visit the Han River, and somehow, impossibly, he was there too, sitting on a bench pretending to read a newspaper until she sat beside him, and they spent the afternoon like 2 ordinary people, with no company, no arranged marriage, no impossible gulf of wealth and worlds between them. For 6 weeks, It was enough. Then came the Thursday that changed everything. Madame Tae-hyun had never liked Maya, had barely registered her existence beyond a household staff line item, someone to direct with a raised eyebrow rather than address by name. So when she stood in the doorway of the garden at dusk and watched her son press his forehead against the forehead of the Nigerian maid, watched him whisper something that made her laugh, watched him kiss her knuckles with a tenderness Tae-hyun hadn't seen him show anyone in years, something in the older woman's chest turned to ice. She said nothing that night. She was not a woman who acted in the heat of a moment. She watched, and she waited, and 3 days later she summoned Maya to her private sitting room while Tae-hyun was in a board meeting he could not leave. "Sit," So-hyun said, not looking up from the tea she was pouring, and Maya sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, every instinct in her body screaming that this conversation would end badly. "I know what has been happening between you and my son." So-hyun set down the teapot with a precision that was somehow more frightening than if she'd slammed it. "I want you to understand that I do not blame you entirely. You are young, he is handsome, and he made you feel important, I'm sure, the way rich men do with women who have nothing. It's a very old story." Maya's throat tightened, humiliation and fury warring in her chest, but she said nothing. "But it ends now." So-hyun finally looked at her, and her eyes were flat, businesslike, the eyes of a woman who had spent 30 years protecting an empire and would not let a household maid unravel it. "My son marries Jung-hana in 4 months. That marriage secures a merger worth 800 billion won, and my husband's legacy. It is not negotiable, and it is certainly not something I will allow a maid to jeopardize, because my son is confused about what he wants." "With respect, madam, that's between Tae-hyun and—" "Don't." And So-hyun's voice cracked like a whip, and Maya fell silent. "Do you think I don't know what you're doing? Do you think this is the first time a woman without a future has tried to attach herself to a man with one?" The unfairness of it burned in Maya's throat, but she held her tongue, because she understood, with the sudden clarity of the truly powerless, that nothing she said in this room would matter. "I looked into your family," So-hyun continued, and Maya's stomach dropped through the floor. "Your father's construction company in Enugu. The debts he left when it collapsed. The loan shark your mother has been quietly paying off every month so he doesn't come looking for the rest. Did you know I could make one phone call and have that debt called in full, tomorrow, and your mother would lose the house you grew up in?" Maya's hands had gone cold. "Please, I don't want to do that." So-hyun's voice softened, almost kind, which was somehow worse. "I don't take pleasure in destroying people, Maya. But I will protect my family's future, and if that means your family suffers for it, I will make that choice without hesitation. So here is what will happen. You will resign quietly, tomorrow. You will tell no one why, especially not my son. You will leave Seoul, or stay, I don't care which, but you will disappear from his life completely, and in exchange, I will make sure your family's debt is quietly settled and forgotten. Consider it severance. And if I refuse?" Tae-hyun's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then I destroy your family, and I still end this. The only question is whether you leave with something or with nothing." Maya sat there for a long moment, the walls of the sitting room pressing in on her, the weight of every year she'd spent protecting her mother and Chidi settling on her chest like a stone. She thought of her father's face the day the business collapsed. She thought of Chidi's letters, full of hope about engineering school. She thought of her mother's voice on the phone, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And she thought of Tae-hyun's forehead against hers in the garden 2 nights ago, the way he'd said, "I've never felt this way about anyone," like it was the truest thing he'd ever said. She chose her family. She had always known, somewhere underneath the hope she'd let herself feel these 6 weeks, that she would have to. "I'll go," she said, and her voice didn't shake, though everything inside her was breaking. She left the next morning before dawn, packed the single suitcase she'd arrived with 3 years earlier, and walked out through the same iron gates she'd first walked through as a girl of 22 with nothing but hope and a folded address. She left no note. So-hyun had been explicit, nothing that could be traced back, nothing that could give Tae-hyun a thread to pull. She took a room in a cramped boarding house in Gurogu, took a job at a small Nigerian restaurant near Itaewon that paid less than half what the Beck household had, and she told herself, every single night for 2 weeks, that she had done the right thing. Tae-hyun found the note the housekeeper had left on his desk. "Maya has resigned, effective immediately," and felt the floor drop out from under him. He called her phone 11 times that first day. It rang and went to voicemail, because Maya, sitting on the floor of her tiny room with her back against the wall, couldn't bring herself to answer, couldn't trust her own voice not to tell him everything. By the 3rd day, he was tearing through the house demanding answers from staff who genuinely didn't know anything, and by the 5th day, when his mother finally sat him down with an expression of practiced sympathy, he understood, with a cold clarity, exactly what had happened. "She left because it was never going to work, Tae-hyun," So-hyun said gently, so gently, and he almost believed the performance until he caught the flicker in her eyes, the same flicker he'd learned to recognize in boardrooms his whole life, the tell of someone lying with complete confidence. "These things happen. She was a maid. You're the heir to a conglomerate." Perhaps she realized that on her own. "What did you do?" His voice was low, dangerous in a way she'd never heard from her son before. "I didn't do anything but tell her the truth about her situation." Seo-yeon's composure didn't crack. "Whatever happens next is between her conscience and yours." He didn't believe a word of it. He spent the next week using every resource available to a man with his name and his money. Private investigators, contacts in immigration records, a former college friend who worked in banking and could trace wire transfers. It took him 9 days to find out about the debt his mother had threatened to call in. It took him 2 more to find the boarding house in Gurogu. He stood outside it on a Tuesday evening in the rain, having walked the last 4 blocks after his driver couldn't find parking, his expensive coat soaked through, and when Maya opened the door to see who'd knocked and found him standing there, dripping, exhausted, furious and devastated in equal measure, she nearly closed the door in his face out of sheer self-preservation. "Don't," he said before she could. "Please. I know what my mother did. I know she threatened your family. I know you didn't leave because you didn't want me. I know you left to protect them. Just don't lie to me now. Not after everything." Maya stood in the doorway, rain blowing sideways into the narrow hall, and felt 3 years of carefully built walls crumble in the space of one sentence. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, but she was already stepping back to let him in. Inside, in the small room that smelled like the cheap heater she couldn't afford to run all night, she told him everything. The debt, the threat, So-yeon's flat, business-like cruelty, the impossible choice she'd been given. Tae-hyun sat on the edge of her narrow bed with his soaked coat still on, listening, his jaw tightening with every sentence, and when she finished he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to fix this," he said finally. "You can't fix this, Tae-hyun. Your mother controls. I don't mean the debt. I can handle the debt myself, quietly, without her knowing." He reached for her hands, and this time she let him take them without hesitation, some dam inside her finally breaking after weeks of holding everything back. "I mean all of it. The marriage, my father's plans. This whole life I've spent 30 years being told I don't get to choose." He looked up at her, and there was something new in his face. something that hadn't been there in the garden 6 weeks ago, a resolve that had been forged in 9 days of searching, of fear, of realizing exactly how much he stood to lose. I'm not marrying Jung Hana. I don't care what it costs me. It could cost you everything. The company, your father's trust, your whole. It already has cost me everything these past 2 weeks, thinking I'd lost you and not knowing why. His voice broke on the last word, and Maya felt her own eyes burn. I would rather have nothing and have you than have all of it and spend the rest of my life wondering what I gave up. If this story is pulling at your heart, the way it pulled at ours writing it, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Maya and Tae-hyun's. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this community spans the whole world, and we love seeing it. The engagement dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday. 300 guests, the Jung family's entire board, half of Seoul's business elite, all gathered in the grand ballroom of the Baek residence to formalize a merger 800 billion won in the making. Chairman Baek had spent 18 months negotiating it. So-yeon had spent 6 weeks planning the dinner down to the last flower arrangement. Neither of them knew that their son had spent the same week quietly transferring the funds to clear a debt in Enugu, Nigeria, that neither of them had ever heard of, and preparing to burn down the future they'd built for him. Maya wasn't supposed to be there. She had no invitation, no place among 300 guests in silk and diamonds, and every rational part of her had told Tae-hyun, repeatedly, that whatever he was planning, she should not be present for it. I need you there, he'd said, holding her face in both hands 2 nights before, his forehead against hers the way it had been in the garden all those weeks ago. Not hiding, not pretending. I need everyone in that room to understand exactly why I'm doing what I'm about to do. She stood at the edge of the ballroom that Saturday evening in a dress Tae-hyun had insisted on buying her, watching 300 of Seoul's wealthiest people mingle under crystal chandeliers, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the people nearest her could hear it. Young Hana stood beside her own parents near the head table, elegant and composed, entirely unaware of the storm about to break over the room. Chairman Baek rose first, glass in hand, and began the toast that would formalize the engagement. The merger, the legacy, 2 great families joined for the next generation. So-yeon stood beside him, radiant with the particular satisfaction of a woman watching years of careful maneuvering come to fruition. Tae-hyun stood, and the room quieted, expecting him to accept his father's toast with the practiced grace he'd been trained for since childhood. Instead, he set down his glass. Before this goes any further, he said, and his voice carried clearly across the ballroom, steady in a way that made his mother's smile falter. I need to say something, and I need everyone in this room to hear it. Tae-hyun, his father's voice held a warning. I'm not marrying Jung Hana. The words dropped into the ballroom like a stone into still water, and Maya watched 300 faces turn toward the head table in shock. I have enormous respect for the Young family, and none of this is Hana's fault. She deserves someone who chose her, and that was never going to be me, no matter how many negotiations happened behind closed doors. You are embarrassing this family in front of everyone we— Seo-yeon's voice was low, furious, barely contained. I know exactly what I'm doing. He turned to face his mother directly, and Maya saw something pass between them, years of unspoken tension finally surfacing in front of 300 witnesses. The same way you knew exactly what you were doing when you threatened a woman's family in Nigeria to make her disappear from my life. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. So-yeon's face went pale, then red, her composure cracking for the first time Maya had ever witnessed. I'm not going to stand here and destroy you in front of your friends, Mother, because despite everything, I understand why you did it. You were trying to protect this family the only way you know how. His voice softened slightly, and Maya's chest ached at the visible effort it took him to hold on to both his fury and his love for his mother in the same breath. But I need you, and Father, and everyone in this room, to understand that I am not going to spend my life inside a marriage and a company that were built for me before I ever had a say in either. I love someone. I have loved her for months, quietly, because I was afraid of exactly this moment. I'm done being afraid of it. He looked out across the ballroom, found Maya standing near the edge of the crowd, and crossed the entire length of the room to reach her, ignoring the scandalized whispers, ignoring his father's rising fury, ignoring everything except her. "This is Maya," he said, taking her hand in front of 300 of Seoul's most powerful people, in front of his parents, in front of the woman he was supposed to marry. "She worked in this house as staff for 3 years. She is the most honest, most selfless person I have ever known, and she left my life to protect her family from my mother's threats, and I am done letting anyone, including my own parents, decide what I'm allowed to want." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Maya could feel every eye in the room on her, could feel the heat rising in her face, but she held Tae-hyun's hand and did not look away. Chairman Baek's face was a thundercloud, but it was Tae-hyun who spoke first, her voice unsteady in a way Maya had never heard from her. "You would destroy everything I've built, everything your father has built, for a maid? I would rather have nothing and have my own life," Tae-hyun said quietly, "than have everything and spend it as someone I don't recognize." The silence stretched, 300 guests frozen in stunned tableau, until Young Hana, of all people, set down her own glass and let out a short, surprised laugh. "Honestly," she said, loud enough for the room to hear, "I've been dreading this wedding for a month." Someone had to say something. A ripple of nervous, then genuine laughter moved through parts of the crowd, breaking the unbearable tension just slightly, and Maya felt Tae-hyun's hand tighten around hers in something like relief. Chairman Baek did not laugh. He stared at his son for a long, terrible moment, the weight of 30 years of expectation hanging between them, and then, finally, in a voice pitched only for their small circle, he said, "We will discuss this privately, not here." It wasn't approval, but it wasn't the explosion Maya had braced for either, and for a man who had never once backed down publicly, the choice to postpone rather than detonate was, in its own cold way, a door left open. Tae-hyun said nothing at all. She simply turned and walked from the ballroom, her heels sharp against the marble, leaving her husband to manage the wreckage of the evening she'd spent 6 weeks perfecting. The weeks that followed were not easy. Maya had known they wouldn't be, and Tae-hyun had never pretended otherwise. Chairman Baek did not speak to his son for nearly a month, furious about the collapsed merger, embarrassed in front of the city's business elite, uncertain what to do with an heir who had just proven he could not be controlled the way he'd assumed. The Young deal restructured into something smaller, colder, without the marriage attached, costing the Baek company real money and real standing that Tae-hyun understood he would spend years rebuilding. But he did not take it back. Not once. So-hyun took longer to come around than her husband, her pride wounded in a way that ran deeper than business. It was Maya, in the end, who made the first move toward her, showing up alone at the Baek residence 6 weeks after the engagement dinner, asking the housekeeper if Madam would see her, and standing in the same sitting room where she'd once been threatened, this time refusing to be dismissed. "I'm not here to ask your forgiveness for existing," Maya said, when Seo-yeon finally, reluctantly, agreed to see her. "I'm here because your son loves you, even after everything, and I don't want to be the reason his relationship with his mother stays broken. Whatever you think of me, that part isn't about me at all." So-yeon studied her for a long time, something shifting behind her carefully composed face. Not warmth, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of respect for a woman who had walked back into the house where she'd been threatened and told the truth anyway. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she said finally. "Probably both," Maya admitted, and for the first time, something that might have almost been the ghost of a smile crossed Tae-hyun's face. It would take months more before that relationship healed into anything real. Tae-hyun was not a woman who changed quickly or easily, and some wounds, Maya understood, simply took time. But it began there, in that sitting room, with the truth finally spoken plainly between two women who had once stood on opposite sides of an impossible line. A year later, Maya stood in the same garden where Tae-hyun had first told her he wasn't going to pretend he didn't love her, except this time she wasn't wearing a maid's apron, and this time 300 guests had gathered not for a merger but for an actual wedding, hers. Her mother had flown in from Enugu for the first time in her life, standing in the front row in a dress Maya had chosen for her, weeping openly through the entire ceremony. Chidi, now enrolled in his first year of engineering school, thanks to a scholarship Tae-hyun had quietly arranged, without ever mentioning it, stood beside their mother, looking like he couldn't quite believe any of it was real. Even So-hyun was there, seated in the second row, and when Maya caught her eye during the vows, the older woman offered the smallest, most genuine nod Maya had ever received from her. Not quite warmth, but something that had, over a year of hard-won effort, finally stopped being cold. Tae-hyun took her hands at the altar the way he had that first rainy night in the boarding house, the way he had in the garden all those months before everything changed, and Maya understood, standing there in the golden evening light with her whole family finally whole again, that some love stories really did survive everything the world threw at them. The class lines, the desperate threats, the empires built to keep two people apart. If Maya and Tae-hyun's story moved you even half as much as it moved us telling it, don't scroll away without hitting subscribe. This channel exists because of viewers like you who believe love stories like this deserve to be told. Drop a comment and let us know which moment hit hardest, whether it was the engagement dinner or that rainy doorstep, because we read every single one. And if you haven't already, hit like right now so more people can find this story. We'll see you in the next one.